Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into the story of a company that promised to feed the world and completely change farming as we know it. But instead, it got tangled up in decades of scandal and controversy. This is the Monsanto story.
So our story doesn't start in some high-tech lab. It starts on a dusty country road in Arkansas, where in 2016, a farmer named Mike Wallace was shot and killed. And, the reason why is what's so shocking. It wasn't about money, it wasn't a land dispute, it was about a chemical designed to kill weeds. That one event tells you just how high the stakes were in the world that Monsanto built, a world that could actually turn neighbor against neighbor. But, to really get how a simple weed killer could lead to actual violence, we've got to go back, way back to the 1940s. Because back then, farmers had this huge, simple problem. And what looked like a miracle solution was just around the corner.
For literally centuries, farmers had two pretty terrible choices when it came to weeds. Option 1, spend endless, back-breaking hours pulling them all out by hand. Option 2, spray your fields with some seriously toxic stuff, like arsenic. It was a total lose-lose situation.
And then came the breakthrough, a total game changer. Scientists discovered that these synthetic hormones, chemicals called 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, could do something that sounded almost like magic. They could act as a selective herbicide. All of a sudden, you could spray an entire field of corn, and these chemicals would hunt down and destroy the weeds, but leave your valuable crops completely untouched.
This was, no joke, a revolution. Farmers could now manage their weeds with just a tiny fraction of the effort. And these chemicals didn't just change farms, they're pretty much responsible for creating that iconic weed-free American suburban lawn. The whole industry just exploded, and a big chemical company by the name of Monsanto wanted a piece of that action.
But this so-called miracle solution, it was hiding a really dark secret. And it would take a disaster at a factory to even begin to drag that danger out into the light.
So picture this, it's 1949, and a Monsanto factory that makes 2,4,5-T explodes. The workers start developing these horrific skin problems, and nobody knows why. It actually took 8 years for a German scientist to finally connect the dots. When you make the herbicide at too high a temperature, it creates this incredibly toxic byproduct called dioxin. And this hidden poison was about to be used on a scale nobody had ever seen before, as the US military prepared for war in Vietnam.
Get ready for this number. The US military sprayed 72 million liters of Agent Orange, which is just a cocktail of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T all over Vietnam to clear away the jungle. And here is the absolute gut punch. Internal documents later proved that both Monsanto and Dow Chemical knew their product was contaminated with, and I'm quoting here, the most toxic compound they have ever experienced. They knew, but they never warned the government.
The human cost was just staggering. We're talking millions of Vietnamese civilians, not to mention soldiers on both sides who were exposed. And that exposure left this tragic legacy of cancer, horrific birth defects, and other health problems that are still haunting families to this very day. As you can imagine, people were furious. Monsanto's reputation was in the gutter, their best-selling chemical was getting phased out, and they desperately needed a new miracle. They needed something that not only worked, but that they could sell to the public as completely, undeniably safe.
And they found it. They found their new miracle in a compound called glyphosate. And honestly, the science behind it seemed brilliant. Glyphosate works by attacking something called the shikimate pathway, which is a process that is absolutely essential for a plant to live. But here's the marketing genius part. That same pathway doesn't even exist in humans or animals. So that allowed Monsanto to make this incredibly powerful claim. This stuff is fundamentally safe for people.
So they marketed it as Roundup, and it was pitched as the perfect herbicide. It wasn't contaminated with dioxin like the old stuff. It didn't just kill some weeds, it killed pretty much every weed. And it was biodegradable. Monsanto even went so far as to claim it was safer than table salt. It really looked like the perfect solution.
But this perfect solution created a brand new business problem. And Monsanto's answer to that problem would end up giving them an unbelievable amount of control over the entire world's food supply. So here's the catch. Roundup was so good at its job. It was what's called non-selective. It just killed every green thing it touched. Which raises a pretty big question, right? How is a farmer supposed to spray a field of soybeans with, well, killing all the soybeans?
And this question led to one of the most brilliant and most controversial business strategies of our time. It was a 4-step model. First, you have the powerful, patented chemical, Roundup. Second, you use genetic engineering to create Roundup-ready seeds, crops that are literally immune to your own poison. Third, you lock farmers into buying both the chemical and the special seeds from you. And fourth, you enforce your patents with an army of investigators and lawsuits. It was a perfect, closed system.
And the control they had was just absolute. Farmers who bought these seeds had to sign these intense contracts that forbade them from saving seeds for the next year, a practice that's basically as old as farming itself. They even had to agree to let Monsanto investigators just walk onto their land whenever they wanted to take samples. And the craziest part? You agreed to all these terms just by opening the bag.
For decades, this system completely dominated agriculture. But then, the cracks started to show in that safe solution, and a long, hidden history of corporate manipulation was about to be exposed for the whole world to see.
Okay, so the big turning point was in 2015. A research agency for the World Health Organization dropped a bombshell. They classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. Now, this completely flew in the face of everything Monsanto had been saying for 40 years. So how could this possibly be?
Thousands of lawsuits forced the company to release its internal documents, which we now know as the Monsanto Papers, and they revealed a pretty shocking truth. There was this landmark study from back in 2000, a paper cited over and over again as definitive proof of Roundup safety. Well, it turns out it wasn't independent at all. An internal email from a Monsanto scientist just spelled out the plan. We would be doing the writing, and they would just edit and sign their names, so to speak. They ghostwrote their own safety study.
The fallout from all this has been immense. Bayer, the German company that bought Monsanto back in 2018, was pretty much left holding the bag. As of today, they have paid out over $10 billion to settle more than 100,000 lawsuits from people who claim that Roundup gave them cancer.
And here is the ultimate irony in all of this. After decades of being overused, nature adapted. Weeds started to evolve a resistance to glyphosate, which made the core product less and less effective. So now, a lot of the Roundup products you might buy for your lawn today don't even have glyphosate in them anymore.
So what do they use instead? 2,4-D, the original chemical from the 1940s. The entire story has come completely full circle.
You know, when you look at it, the Monsanto story is about way more than just one chemical or one company. It really forces us to ask this fundamental question about where we draw the line between corporate profit and public safety. Because when the science itself can be bought, sold, and manipulated, who's actually left to protect our health?